This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Firstly, thank you very much for coming out. I had made this brief comment earlier, especially because of the topic tonight being manage your inner critic. My wife, who's sitting in the back, my wife and I, we come regularly to these Tuesday events, and so many of them are standing room only, so I'm going, so where are all these people? Am I not measuring up? It really is a pleasure to be here. I now live in Eagle Cove. I now live in Eagle Point. I'm giving a presentation at Eagle Cove coming up. We only moved here the end of June, so this is a new community for me, and I appreciate being able to be a part of the community and to support what they're doing here at RVML. The very first time my friend Bruce Rawls took me to an event when I was up visiting, I was just so impressed. I immediately offered, if you were interested, to do some things for you. So I appreciate this opportunity to do that. As you know, tonight's topic is managing your inner critic, and I want to suggest to you at your convenience, if you haven't had a chance, and maybe you won't now until the break, to look at the 3 flyers that were included on your seat talking about the inner critic. And if not, at the very least, you could take them home as kind of a nice summary reminder about what I want to talk to you about tonight and managing your inner critic. Firstly, your inner critic is a part of you that develops that is genuinely, honestly meant to protect you. Many of you might think of it as partly ego-related, in that when we start out and we have lots of different experiences from day one, actually even prior to being born, you have awareness within the womb. And these experiences can, unfortunately, most commonly lead to a great deal of insecurity, feelings of deep insecurity. And then this critic is born, which tries to protect you from harm, to feel loved, to feel accepted, to feel like you truly do fit in. But when I go over, which I will do briefly soon, what actually happens, and obviously I'm going to have to generalize when I talk to a group about what these experiences are. They will be different for everyone depending on your family of origin, your community, your culture. What you come to believe, what your critic comes to believe, this part of you, is going to be highly dependent on largely your parents' beliefs and values. And so some of you may actually find this very attractive, some of you very scary, but you are a lot like your parents. And, well, let me get into how this actually works. Let's start with actually your being born. If you can appreciate, again, that you do have awareness prior to being born, I don't know for exactly how many months, but whatever your awareness is and for however long, can you appreciate just in terms of temperature, what temperature would you only have known prior to birth? About 99 degrees, your mother's core body temperature. And what temperature is it in the delivery room?
70.
Well, it's at least a good 30-degree drop in temperature. So again, all you've known is, say, 99, and then let's say it's 69. I'm going to tell you, if this isn't starting to register right away, that this is going to be a pretty big shock, a very stressful event to have this rather dramatic change in temperature. I mean, even the way we're dressed tonight, if whatever temperature it is, if when you left here you went out into 30-degree colder weather, you surely would appreciate this is going to be a fairly dramatic change. But what if you only had known another temperature and then all of a sudden, without any kind of warning, preparation, boom, 30-degree drop in temperature? How about lightness and darkness? What would you have only known prior to birth? Only darkness. And what's it like in the delivery room? Relatively bright, largely set for the convenience of the hospital staff. But from your perception experience, this is going to be another very stressful event. How about sound? Do you think you perceive sound differently pre and post birth? Sure, within the womb and sacs and solutions, sounds are going to be relatively muffled versus in the delivery room, any conversations, clanging of instruments, trays, or whatever, are going to be highly amplified to you in terms of what you had experienced prior to this. What other fun things happen at birth? You get slapped. And do you think at that point you were thinking, thanks, I needed that? You've got to start breathing, and so they may have to put this apparatus into your mouth to extract mucus. And again, how are you thinking about this one? Oh, thank you for doing that. I really needed that. And even the experience of being taken from the mother, like you really care how much you weigh or how long you are. But in fact, you will be separated from, however we understand energy or any sense of bonding with the mother organism, and then there's this other separation. So I jokingly say, but if you could have expressed what it was like to be born, what do you think you might have said upon being born? No swearing. I want to go home. And you know, it's interesting, I've done this for so many years, and that's the most common response is, put me back. So if you can say that here as intelligent, reasoning adults, imagine the impact it had on you when you didn't have your reasoning mind. You weren't able to go, you know, a lot of people have been born before me. You think they'd have figured this out better by now. You did not have that ability to reason what an insecure experience this actually is or was. So what happens, and I'm going to allude to even what can happen prior to your birth, but what happens day one, and I hope you can appreciate this, huge, deep-seated case of insecurity. Does this make sense? Yes. So it's not a matter of you're not special enough, you're not intelligent enough, you're stuck. You were simply unprepared for what you got yourself into, including, again, for approximately however long you've felt relatively secure within the womb. We tend to focus on mom and the difficulty with labor pains for mom, you know, giving birth. How do you think you liked going through that vaginal canal after all you knew was this? And all of the muscles and the contractions and so forth. So again, this is a very dramatic, not exactly an experience where you're going to say, boy, I'm really pleased that I've been born and I'm glad to be here, in any sense of, I feel good about this. It gets worse. It does. So, but let me explain to you two things in particular that cause these early life experiences to be so indelible, so dominant. In fact, I'm sure you've heard a psychologist or others say just how important your earliest years are in your life and how they set you up for adult patterns. And I would say by age 4, certainly by age 7, the pattern is really set. That's how strong your early life experiences are, and again, I'll explain why soon, such that in terms of parenting, if either you think of yourself as the parent and you were parenting your children, or how you were parented, that pattern is pretty much really definitely set by age 7. And then more or less, the parents are there to guide you as you go through this, but you're going to be stuck unless you learn ways to really change these early deep-seated beliefs that you are about to acquire. One of the things that leads to these early life experiences becoming so strong is that your mind functions very literally at first. I already mentioned that you don't have the use of reason and logic at first to go, okay, why haven't they figured this birth experience out better? So I'll tell you a story that'll make you laugh. I have a very good friend who is older and was actually in elementary school during the Women's Christian Temperance Union days. And he said one day someone from the Women's Christian Temperance Union came into his elementary school room to talk about the evils of alcohol. And he said that she pulled out 2 beakers, and one was filled with water. She asked actually a child, you know this works, would one of you like to volunteer and go out and fill this with water? Come back in. And then she filled the other beaker jar with alcohol. Then she reached into another jar with tweezers and pulled out 2 night crawlers. And she dropped one into the jar of water, and it appeared to be okay. Then she dropped the other worm into the alcohol. This worm's in trouble. So now she calls on the class, what does this prove? And the one little fella she called on said, if you've got worms, drink. I'm glad it did make you laugh. But it helps me make my point quite well in terms of how literal your mind functions at that time. You did not have the use of abstract reasoning at that early stage in your life. So another example of this would be if you called someone on the telephone and a very young person answered the phone and you said, hello, is your mother there? And the child answers, yes. The child, again, does not have the ability at that time to abstract beyond the literal that you really want now this child to go bring your mother to the phone, the mother to the phone. So again, appreciate again, when you are very young, your mind functions very literally. So what will happen is that you will interpret your life experiences very differently as this youngster than you would if you were an adult and had other life experience and reasoning to understand far differently how you experience things as an adult than you do as this infant. For example, if as adults someone did something we really didn't like, but we love these people, do you know how we have the ability as adults to separate the behavior from the person? So we really may not like what they did, but we could still love them, would still love them. As an infant, you don't understand that. You take things very literally again. So if you were in some way thwarted or made to feel insecure or what you're doing wasn't okay, instead of the behavior's not okay, you're not okay. Do you see how that would work? And I'll give you an example, even in a very positive way, how this works. Let's say that we have an infant crawling, and I'm looking for a wall socket. And so this infant is crawling on the floor, and you can observe this and see the child's headed for the wall socket and potentially then going to create a real problem for that child. So as any reasoning, caring adult, you're going to go and do something to keep that child from potentially harming itself. Does that make sense? Okay, but what I will tell you is that when you in some way thwart that child, because we are very self-centered at first, is not thinking, oh, thank you for potentially saving my life. It almost certainly will react in a negative fashion, but again, with an interpretation that it's not that my behavior is unacceptable, I'm unacceptable. So let me just take you, and I don't want to overdo this, but I really want to have you understand why you get so stuck, how this inner critic as such develops, and then why it is so difficult to break this pattern. And maybe even more importantly for me is not only because it affects you, but now your beliefs are an energy. And whatever you are will dramatically affect who and what you draw into your life experience and all of your relationships, whether they're intimate, couples relationships or co-workers, with your children, with your pets, everything. So here's how it goes. I'm just remembering that I didn't tell you the second thing. I wanted to tell you why these early life experiences are so dramatic and stay with you so deeply. What you also don't have early on is emotional control. So just a simple example would be if you really do have a youngster and children, say, are playing with a toy, and you were to take that toy from the child. How does a child likely respond to you having just taken that toy away? Right, they have a very limited repertoire, usually around a mini temper tantrum, but to let you know that they're not pleased. So, because I believe that, well, everything is about energy, and if you can appreciate that when we experience something and we take in that energy and it is a wave, that if, for example, I were speaking at this level, or I whispered, or I shouted, we would actually have the same wavelength, but a very different amplitude. So what I think happens is when we experience things early on and without emotional control, so whenever we have these temper tantrum kind of experiences, they're highly charged emotionally. So it isn't just a normal experience, it's a very charged experience. Does that make sense? Okay, so here we go. This is a day in your life. Now let me say additionally that I sincerely believe most parents mean well. They truly choose to have their children grow up to be contributing, independent, successful, healthy, everything positive about that child. But one of the unique things that happens in parenting, and this may even sound trite, but parenting is probably the most difficult thing you will even think about doing. But in raising this child, where initially, and to give you a couple of examples of just how encouraging we are as parents to, or for the children at first, but let me use the examples of walking and talking. But most parents, in fact, in my experience and understanding, most parents actually record the day you took your first step and said your first word. That's how important this is. But then, if you'll excuse me, as soon as you can walk and talk, it's sit down and shut up. Now, that's an extreme, but in terms of appreciating that once you become this active, curious youngster, most children can become quite a challenge. And again, no matter how loving you are, how much training you have in parenting and so forth, essentially, parenting is on-the-job training. That the first child is largely the grand experiment. In fact, if you've had more than one child, you probably have had the experience where the first child comes to you at some point and says, well, how come I wasn't able to do that when I was that age? And you wished you had the wherewithal to say to yourself, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing then, I don't know a whole hell of a lot better now. And that it's just that difficult to have that tremendous responsibility in understanding the dynamics of infancy and childhood and adolescence and helping that person really grow to be this unique, free individual, healthy. So back to my day again in your life. So I want you to appreciate, for example, it's raining this evening, at least a little bit, but for my story, let's say that it rained pretty well. And it's muddy outside. And again, for my story, you were in charge of children. And in order for you to come to this lecture this evening, you had to make arrangements with a neighbor, say, to watch the children while you could come to the lecture. And then the instructions were once the lecture was over and you came home, you would phone, and then the children could come back home, and then this would just work fine. However, remember again, it rained and it's muddy. So you were very clear in talking to the children that they could not take the shortcut they might normally to go next door to the neighbors because there was a real risk they'd track mud into your neighbor's house, and this was not okay. And again, you're really clear about this. They must take the sidewalk. And similarly, when they come back home, that they must take the sidewalk. You don't want them tracking mud into your house either. So you go to class, you get back home, you call the kids, and you say, please come home, we're home now. But remember again, you must walk on the sidewalk. Do you understand us? Yes. But then let's just say it's a terrible case of bad timing. And when the children get to the door to come home, you're on a long distance phone call, something where you cannot be there to greet them at the door. But when you finally get off the phone, you don't have to wonder where they are. You can follow their mud tracks through the house. Now, how do you think your parents would have handled this situation when they caught up with you? You're one of those kids that just brought mud into the house. What do you think your parents might have said or done to you? Clean it up. And in what tone of voice?
Rather demanding.
Rather demanding.
Spankings.
You might have gotten a spanking.
I don't want to know what happened.
You don't want to know what.
Mine would want to know what happened.
So she would try to find out what went wrong that you didn't follow the directions so well. In a nice tone of voice?
Well, she's not happy about it.
Okay. But the point of saying this now twice about that tone of voice is whatever is said or done. At the more extreme, make no mistake, you could have got, I definitely could have gotten hit. I can tell you that in my experience. But think about this for a moment. If you really love someone, like think of a best friend, would you ever hit them? I mean, think about this rationally. If you love someone, would you hit them? Now here you are, this youngster who doesn't have the use of reason and logic, and you're already feeling deeply insecure, and somebody hits you. How are you feeling about yourself? Or how are you thinking about your relationship with that person? I feel loved and secure? Or even simply that threatening voice, sound of the voice, you're going to interpret as not that my behavior wasn't okay, I didn't listen so well, but I'm not okay. Then we have the reality of cleaning up the mud. And so in our practical experience, okay, so who does clean up the mud? The parents might say, you clean it up, but chances are in your experience, you know, if they clean it up, God knows what can happen and make it worse. So no matter how this gets cleaned up, do you understand more or less, everybody goes to bed mad. So now imagine you wake up the next morning and you're small enough that you're still in a high chair. I call it the ringside seat for observing your mother at breakfast. And as much as, again, for safety reasons, we're in that high chair and supposed to be in there securely, God only knows we have ways of finding out how to get out of there. It's just a matter of time. But let's say that while Mom is making breakfast, in the process of doing that, she makes noises, clangs a couple pots together. Can you appreciate from the child's point of view, and you, try to think of this as this happened to you, that you're thinking in some sense, boy, would I like to get my hands on those pots and pans and do that. And again, God only knows your day will come. So let's say that in the process of making breakfast, Mom also leaves the room to go, say, check on the laundry. And you figured out how to slip out of that high chair. And even though, let's say that there are cupboards that we normally keep locked, or so that we know children are, from the adult point of view, going to get into things, from the child's perspective, just exploring your curiosity. I honestly believe curiosity is an instinct that drives us to learn. It's a very fundamental positive thing. So while Mom has gone off, you're crawling on the floor, you open a cupboard that shouldn't have been able to be opened, and lo and behold, there are a whole bunch of pots and pans and lids. And so what is your natural response going to be? you're going to pretty much get a hold of every pot, pan, and lid you can, not because you're a bad kid. You're curious, and you're going to feel each one separately because you don't know everyone's going to feel the same and taste the same. So you get a hold of the first pot and pan, thumb it up pretty good. Taste it, chances are you don't care for the metallic taste, down it goes. You get a hold of the next one, pretty similar process until mom shows up 6 or 7 pots and pans and lids later. So how is mom going to handle this one? And she hasn't gotten over the mud incident from last night. So what do you think, sincerely, your parents would have said to you at this point if you had just dragged out these pots and pans from the cupboard, having slipped out of the high chair, etc.?
You're a bad child.
You're a bad child. The great probability it's not going to be a positive comment. Your mom's probably thinking, I had 100 things to do today. I did not need 101. And so in some way, and it doesn't even have to be vocalized, her feelings are an energy that you sense. And you know this probably more as an adult, how your parents didn't always have to say a thing. It was that look. Or whatever it is that we're projecting where you know, not again that the behavior is not acceptable, you're not acceptable. So the way you as a child are likely to have responded to this event is to cry, and especially if you got spanked, but you're really more pained emotionally than if you actually had gotten hit. And so your response way to deal with this is to skip town. You cry and you want to get away from not just the scene of the crime, but from feeling pain, shamed, and so forth. And maybe on your way out, mom says, good, get out of my sight. And so she's left to try to clean up the pots and pans before it occurs to her, oh my God, now what are you into? And so for my story, let's say that terrible timing, the mail is just delivered. And when I was a youngster, the mail was literally delivered in a slot about belt buckle high on our front door. So it literally just fell right inside the door, and we had a small place anyhow. I was raised in a housing project. So again, terrible timing. You, that youngster, discover the mail before mom does. Now, it's not that you're a bad kid, but appreciate in whatever ability you have at that time to pick something up, this is your first grab. So before very long, can you appreciate, depending until mom shows up, what the mail could look like? And to complicate this, let's say that that was Dad's favorite magazine. So that not only does mom have the chore of trying to resurrect the mail as such, but knows that when Dad gets home from work, she has to face him and explain how it is that his favorite magazine now looks like this. Now, my father probably would have said something like this when he got home to my mother, not to you, but to my mother. What were you doing all damn day long where you're supposed to be taking care of those kids? I'm not kidding. We were in the 50s. I was born in 44. So appreciate not only is mom probably not having a great day dealing with you, but now she has to look forward to dealing with Dad when he gets home. How is she going to handle you the rest of the day? With more patience? So then chances are, well, let me try to use a sense of humor. And sometimes we try. So mom says maybe to you, the child, you're going to grow up and be like your father's side of the family. Or something that maybe helps mom try to cope with the situation. But from your perception experience, again, can you appreciate, it's not that the behavior isn't okay, I'm not okay. So chances are you cry again, skip town, she's trying to deal with the mail while you're doing, you discovered her favorite plant. And what if it's one with real nice fuzzy leaves? You don't know that everyone feels and tastes the same. You are about to find out. You're not a bad kid. You are driven by your curiosity, and you are simply going to check it out. So start with leaf 1. Nice fuzzy leaf. Put that in your mouth. Chances are that didn't taste so great. So down it goes. Spit it out. Second leaf, third leaf. And imagine what that plant looks like before Mom shows up. After the mail, after the pots and pans, after the mud. This is not even lunchtime. And this is 1/2 day in your life where your mind's functioning literally, highly emotionally charged, and you want to wonder why you get stuck around feeling self-hatred or feeling low self-worth or feeling stuck around feeling good about yourself and, oh yeah, I can be successful. I can do anything I want. I have infinite potential. I'm a child of God. What are your chances? So I hope I haven't overstated this, but I wanted to really make sure you understand just what you're up against. And if it wasn't bad enough at home, although believe me, you're going to quickly catch on. And I say if you get yelled at or hit enough, you're not stupid, you're going to catch on how to be, which means how to please your parents. So you are absolutely, almost certainly going to adopt their values and beliefs. Because again, you're not stupid. If you're going to get yelled and hit, you're going to catch on before too long. Now, you absolutely could rebel. And some people do, and because of the early life experience, they choose to really go a whole different direction. But largely, you will be highly conditioned to be like your parents. And can you now really appreciate why that's true? Okay. When you go to school, you're going to learn a whole new set of values. And while for the first 5 years approximately you've learned how to fit in, it's very important that you now feel some sense of security and how it is to conduct yourself. And again, remember from your parents' point of view, they're teaching you they believe what you need to be successful, sincerely. Like my father, I remember publicly him saying to someone that he never chose to be our friends, my brother and my sister. He was going to teach us discipline. And I joke that if that was his God-given life purpose, this guy's in heaven. My father was a very strict disciplinarian. Now, I'm sure that it had some positive effects in terms of my being driven to be the perfectionist that he was. And so I'm sure it got me through graduate school and so forth. But on the other hand, can you appreciate, if any of you know or unfortunately live with a perfectionist or have to work with a perfectionist, this is not funny. Because when will you ever be perfect? So if to earn my father's love, I have to be perfect. If to feel good about myself, I have to be perfect. What are my chances? 0. Until I learn to separate myself from the beliefs of my father and become my own person, where at first I didn't have that chance or choice. I got stuck because of how my mind functioned at first. And now this was my exposure to, this is how you make it in the world. You go to school. And I'm not going to draw this out much longer, but just to point out that when I said it actually gets worse, now you're going to try to fit in your classroom setting, whether it's elementary school, junior high school, senior high school. Can you appreciate or remember just how self-conscious you were when you first went to school and trying to make new friends and to feel comfortable in that setting? You learned how to talk, what music to like, how to speak. When I used to give this lecture, and variations of this lecture many years ago, and I'm really dating myself now, but I remember when the word awesome was at least new for me to hear all the time. And when I grew up, I don't think I ever in my life used the word awesome. But, you know, I would hear it now so frequently from young people, and I'm going, but let me ask you, what's so important about the word awesome? It's all about you're trying to fit in. And how you dress. Do you think you dress, or at least when you were that age, that you dressed randomly, unless your parents dressed you? Can you remember how important it was to dress a certain way? I look at kids today, and I have to tell you, I just shake my head around, oh my God, if my dad, you know, ever saw the way kids dressed and that I was supposed to be able to dress like my friends, this was not going to happen. And I joke a simple example about tennis shoes. I don't know why it is that tennis shoes, even as old as I am, were important even then. And so when I was a kid, we all wore black high-top Keds tennis shoes. And you knew who was wearing black high-top Keds tennis shoes. By the time I got to high school, they were PF Flyers. Everybody wore PF Flyers. And you would never wear them looking new. You would tape your shoes together with adhesive tape if necessary to keep wearing them, but you wouldn't be caught dead in a new pair of PF Flyers. To show you, though, just how much I was willing to risk with my father to fit in, because, of course, my dad was not going to let me walk out on these old scruffy-looking things, right? I threw the scruffy ones out the window into the yard, walked out in nicer-looking ones so I could get out of the house, but before I left the yard, I changed my shoes. Now, isn't that silly? But if you're honest and you reflect back on your own life, you know you did something just as silly in terms of how you learned to fit in. Does this make sense? In fact, unfortunately, either you experienced it and remember yourself as the child or as the parent, just how difficult it probably was for you or for your children in adapting to dealing with, really, kids can be downright cruel to one another. And imagine now again what that is doing to your self-esteem or your sense of self. And all of this is just perfect ammunition for this forming inner critic, which is basically the voice of your parents or other authority figures who are sincerely well-intentioned about what you need to do to feel safe and loved and be successful. So if you'll look at the form that I put on your chair, I'm just going to make a reference for the time being. And actually, on the second page where it says Managing Your Inner Critic, it starts off with a brief definition of what the inner critic is, and the idea of that what was originally supposed to be this protective, positive voice developing within you so that you would feel good, leads to this voice that makes you constantly think you can't do other than make a mistake. And then within what we call, or I'm calling this inner critic, you develop what I call here primary selves. Other aspects of yourself depending on the personality and beliefs of the authority figures in your young life. So if my father being the perfectionist, the probability is that I'm also going to become a perfectionist. And so think in your own life, and I give you lots of questions to think about on the first page. What were the things that your parents had to say about you, or what was their personality as such? So that you will find, if you have this critical voice that makes you feel like you're, the one gentleman said, you know, this self-hatred, or that I can't be successful, if you will listen to what you are saying to yourself or what this inner voice is saying to you, what you will almost always find is that it is a voice from your childhood, from your past, and it isn't you. But we think it's us, when in fact it's just this adapted or adopted voice that came from these well-meaning people, but they had their own ideas about how to be. For example, if you were old enough to go through the Depression or knew someone who was, do you understand the great probability that you would have grown up with this whole idea you've got to learn to save for a rainy day? Would that make sense? Because you knew that there was a time when you really didn't have anything and that you couldn't just spend freely. You didn't have it to spend. But appreciate in later generations when they didn't have an experience where they had to learn to save and be thrifty and so forth, maybe like the Gen X generation, then they don't have your life experience. And so, in fact, what may have happened is that their parents, having gone through a time perhaps where they really did have to be thrifty and save, now said, I'm going to make sure my kids have every advantage I never had. And so their experience could be very different. But appreciate that chances are there's going to be some conflict between one set of beliefs and now a very different one. But here's where it gets really interesting, is that as you develop your own set of beliefs, which aren't yours, they're really somebody else's, in the process of saying, this is how I'm supposed to be successful. If you do something, you better be willing to sign your name to it. You do it right the first time, so you don't have to go back and do it again. Do you understand all of these pronouncements? Just think about what your parents said to you, or your teachers said to you. And by the way, if you've had brothers or sisters, went through the same school, same teachers, invariably, another way your critic gets great ammunition is through comparisons. You know, your brother was really a good student and got really good grades. And then another aspect of that is be careful even about when you can become deceived in a sense when, what if you find yourself being compared in a positive way to somebody else? Any way you look at it, it's still the idea that there's a way to be to feel good about yourself, as though somebody knows what that is. But believe me, the probability is your parents and other authority figures were real sure about what that was. And depending on your religious exposure, and I say this with great sensitivity and respect, but in my experience with religion, you know, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Catholicism, and, you know, there's even this kind of joke, maybe not always so nice, around, God bless you if you went to Catholic school. You know, around the image of, well, I just think of this one play, if any of you saw Nonsense. But you know how you could be treated in that stereotype by the nun. And that there were very, very clear ways about what was acceptable and what wasn't. But here's the fun part again, is whatever you have learned to disown, what is totally unacceptable, you will attract to you in relationships. So as a psychologist, what's interesting that I observe consistently, and usually when I'm working with a person in therapy, if they start talking about their spouse or whatever it is that pushes their buttons, so think about whatever pushes or whoever pushes your buttons, I know who they are. I know a lot about them just because they're telling me now about their partner or the things that bug them. Because I will tell you, and you think about this, and maybe think and talk about it over the break, but I will guarantee you, if you have a partner, that you are very different in some very significant ways. And if you analyze this on the surface, you go at some point, what the hell was I thinking? That I ended up with this person. And one of the things I find fairly consistent is the idea of one of you will be much more a pleaser, and one of you will be much more self-centered. Now, in telling you this, neither is right or wrong. Please don't go there. It's not about right and wrong. It's just that you're different. And so, for whatever reason in my life, but I even know astrologically, now I'm trained scientifically, so some of these other things, and I love coming to these presentations that stretch me quite a bit sometimes. But I remember when someone offered, as part of wanting to pay for therapy, that she would do my astrology chart and even offered to do my wife's. And when she did it and we were going over these charts, she looked at mine and I was absolutely blank on the relationship aspects of my chart and totally filled in terms of the individual aspects. So I apparently, according to her, had become very good at taking care of myself, but rotten in relationships. Had either essentially no experience or no learning in terms of how to develop nurturing emotional relationships. My wife, on the other hand, her chart was exactly the opposite. She was totally blank on the individual side and totally filled in on the relationship side. And I'll never forget this astrologer saying, "You're perfect for each other." Now, I understood what she meant or was intending, but in real life, if one of you is remarkably self-centered and one of you is very developed in terms of relationships and being sensitive and caring and so forth, do you understand, especially in living together, that this isn't always going to go so smoothly? So the good news about this is, if you really understand this, is you are perfect for each other. So one of you, I guarantee you, for the most part, not everybody is as extreme in terms of attracting such an opposite, and certainly not in all ways. But pretty much I will tell you, one of you will be prone to hoard things, to keep things, and one of you can't wait to throw stuff away. And again, how does this happen? One of you will be far neater than the other. In fact, it reminds me of a very sensitive story, just to help you try to keep perspective when these things come up for you. But when I used to work with cancer, that was really the bulk of my life's work, is helping people adjust to a diagnosis of cancer and its treatment and the psychological factors that went into that. In fact, the last time I spoke here, I talked about the psychological factors that I believe underlie chronic disease. But anyhow, this one woman, after her husband died, and I got to know her and her husband quite well before he had died, and obviously when he died, she's upset. I don't want to in any way sound light or dismissive about a very serious event. But in this case, this woman took an unusually long time to adjust to that her husband was now not home, was not alive. And when she finally felt okay enough to actually go out of the house even with family, it took her the longest time to adjust. And then when she finally got to the point that she could actually go out and join friends, she said one of the things that really got her attention and really surprised her was how much her girlfriends were so focused on their husbands and what they did wrong. And there was something about the laundry. And when their husbands took their clothes off, or whenever they were done with their towel, that things just seemed to hit the floor and never got to the hamper. And she remembered, or at least I remember, being really focused on socks. So why can't he just pick up his damn socks and put them in the hamper? And I remember when she said to me, "I wish I had socks to pick up." So one of the things I will tell you to think about and after our break, we'll really focus on things you can do now to begin to feel better about yourself and break this stranglehold that, remember again, you didn't have a choice. You got really stuck with around who you are or who you think you are, is to now I lost my train of thought and I apologize. Where was I?
Socks.
Socks, thank you. Is to focus more on what's right in your life than what's wrong. And I find this consistently, and I have to tell you, it surprises me because, and I'm going to sound again a little trite, but I'm always more surprised when people get along than when they don't. Because you're so different, and you are so set in terms of your beliefs and how you operate and what's right, is that it's amazing that we actually do make this work. So if you can learn to focus on what's right about your partner, or what's right in your life instead of focusing on what's wrong, because there is an unfortunate tendency for us to do that, to focus on what isn't right. For example, if you had 100 things to do in a day and you did 95, in a day you did 95 out of 100, but what are you going to remember at the end of the day? The 5 you didn't do. Now think about it, if you got 95 out of 100 on a test, this is doggone good. But you're going to beat yourself up, or your critic will, about the 5 you didn't get to. And so with your partner, instead of focusing on, and I know this is a pretty dramatic and sensitive example, that he doesn't put his socks away or whatever else, is that thank God you have this partner, and for whatever other reasons, you share your life in a very positive way. And refocus, I say, even on why you got married. Think about it. Why did you get married? Now, believe me, I know things change. In fact, I'll share with you, I didn't get married for the first time till I was 51. So talk about the challenge I presented for my wife when I'd been on my own for 51 years. But why did you get married? What was it about why you wanted to do that, or your partner, that you did that? And did that change? Or just have you changed your focus and now you're focusing on your differences instead of, as my astrologer person would have said to me, you're perfect for each other. Because now you become this wonderful potential balance for each other and teacher for each other. And so God bless my wife and her patience that she is, fortunately, someone who wants to make a relationship work, and fortunately that I was then at that time committed enough to do what I needed to do to change, to now be in relationship. So let's take our break, and then when we come back, we'll talk more about what you can do to change this, and depending on the amount of time, I definitely will take your questions and comments, but maybe even do an exercise or two that you can get in touch with your inner critic and in touch with this inner child, we tend to call it, this very wounded, vulnerable part of yourself that would love to be able to come out and play again and be the free person it started out, but unfortunately, again, it's just gotten terribly squashed. Okay, thank you. I do want to mention that Hearn said that I do have a workshop this Saturday, and unfortunately, when I scheduled this was quite some time ago, we didn't know that there was this big peace event also Saturday afternoon. But anyway, I am scheduled to have a How to Develop Your Intuition workshop this Saturday from 12 to 4, if any of you are interested. And as this evening progresses, you have a better sense perhaps of how you can learn to develop your intuition to access who you really are and what you really need, so that your chances for happiness or success or peace of mind are certainly enhanced tremendously. So indeed, though, I'd like to start by asking if you have any questions or comments before I get into anything else I would choose to say. Yes?
Is that working? Okay, thank you. I have two things. One is, have you found a relationship between PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the inner critic? Because what you were describing at the beginning, it sounds like everybody on the planet must have PTSD. Because the birth experience. And the other is, I was just talking with my friend over here about, self-hatred, and it seems like it goes with self-love, because, like, I adore my doggies or my daughter, but when they piss me off, I could just, I want to chop their little heads off, whatever. And so it makes sense that, yeah, a lot of times I just adore myself, but sometimes when I'm mad at myself, I just hate myself. So isn't that just a normal love-hate relationship?
I want to say it probably is at least relatively normal. I don't know just how extreme when you say love and hate. Because in some cases that could be fairly unhealthy, but you don't make it sound quite that bad. I think that we have to be realistic as human beings and realize that we have a whole range of emotions that need to be expressed, and it would be really very unrealistic to think that you're always supposed to be happy, and that if you're not, something's going wrong. And what comes up for me that has a lot of meaning for me is I remember in the book Conversations with God, if any of you are familiar with that book and Neil Donald Walsh's work.
You just talked about it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyhow, one of the things I remember so well in terms of a comment from God was that our life experience as humans is at least partly, if not largely, related to experiencing what love is not, so that we can more fully appreciate what love is. So I honestly don't think that the life situation we found ourselves in was a mistake, or even that you're screwing it up. It's that we come in again with certain characteristics, and then other certain things we learn that make it easier or more difficult. And if you think in terms of shamanism or concepts like the wounded healer, a lot of this makes sense retrospectively in terms of if you're going to be a healer but you've never experienced what it was like to not be healthy, and you try to approach healing academically or without that life experience, do you understand the probability you're not going to be as good a healer, as effective a healer, as if you've really had your nose rubbed in it pretty good yourself? So your questions or comments are complicated in a way. I mean, back to your PST, post-traumatic stress syndrome thing, is I think you said that very well around, in a way, we could not avoid a remarkable experience around, being born in an early life in terms of the stress that creates and then the problem it creates. Because I was director of mind-body medicine for a large number of cancer centers and trying to help people deal with the disease process, and why I believe that definitely stress is just one kind of big overriding factor, affects a whole lot of stuff. I mean, we know, for example, that stress will compromise your immune system, and without overstating your immune system, if your immune system's working properly, you're going to be relatively healthy. Well, if stress is going to compromise that one thing, there's no question, but it can bring all kinds of problems. And then very much related to that, you have not been brought up to really think about what your needs are. And if I can excuse an overgeneralization about women, but in our culture, women are pretty much brought up to be nurturers. And whether we look at John Gray's work, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, or just really looking at differences, women truly do tend to be more relationship-oriented, extroverted, creative, where men are more analytical, goal-oriented. They tend to be withdrawn in the way they deal with their problems, where women want to try to connect and so forth. So we have real different ways of dealing with these things, and I think it's partly natural, and I think it's partly very much reinforced by the culture in terms of gender roles and how to do things. And if we could, and I'm just going to guess that, the male-femaleness in terms of a balance is perfect. It isn't like what males do are right or wrong, or what females do are right or wrong, is that, if anything, I'm going to give more credit to the women. I mean this sincerely. I think that the women have it figured out better. But in your being conditioned or becoming conditioned to be that nurturer, you can then have a pretty weak balance or opposite in terms of, being able to assert yourself and identify and meet your needs. And if you don't, you really risk problems, not only psychologically, but physiologically. And here's a real small example, but let's say you had a cold or the flu. It'd be real common for you to say to yourself or someone to say to you, see, your body's telling you you need to rest or slow down. And the implication is, had you rested or slowed down, you wouldn't have gotten a cold or flu. But most people, and certainly women, excuse that overgeneralization again, don't go, what are my needs? Your focus, and again, forgive me for picking on the Catholic Church, but your focus is that you are to get married and raise children. That's your greatest sense of self-esteem in this culture, how you feel good about yourself. And for males, it's to be a provider for that family. And then when you try, should you want to even try, to break free of that role and do something differently, I believe at a really deep level that we equate conformity with our parents and community and culture, with feeling loved. And so most people won't even consider wanting to change the values and beliefs of their families of origin. But I'm going to tell you, at least I believe, that your health depends on it. Mental and physical health depends on it. So I give you all credit for your willingness to even look at this and to try to just not accept or feel like I'm stuck and there's nothing I can do about it. Even though I can appreciate, believe me, there are times when we can feel like this. We can. And again, fortunately for the patients of my wife, boy, I was just, my way was the right way. And that was exactly what I learned from my father. I didn't know that I wasn't a very good communicator. I mean, look at me, I'm up here, I'm communicating like crazy. But in a relationship, if we could learn, imagine a couple comes home, and excuse a stereotype, maybe the woman's already home, or she worked and she got home, and now the husband comes home. And let's say he had a really bad day. He maybe had to make a presentation that day at work, and it really didn't go well. And then, of course, if that did happen, his inner critic is going to remind him the whole way home that, well, you screwed that up and how you might have done this differently, and now everybody at work hates you. You're not going to get a raise. You're going to get fired. And you appreciate how we can really do this to ourselves, or that critic part of it does it. And so then by the time this guy gets home, how do you think he's going to be in relationship? So chances are he's in a pretty crummy mood, and he's not just going, hi, honey, whatever else, because men tend to withdraw at that point. He's probably going to just, and, newspaper, TV, or something, and withdraw. And then the unfortunate stereotype for the woman is, what did I do wrong? Instead of, he's having a bad hair day, and I hope he gets over it, is you're going to now, and your critic's going to help you do this, okay, so he probably wanted to talk about this meeting, and I didn't give him enough time this morning to, maybe support him around. He's got this important presentation, and oh yeah, and I stayed up last night reading a book late instead of maybe going to bed earlier with him, and maybe he wanted to fool around. And you'll do this to yourself, or your critic will do it for you around all the things that you definitely did wrong, and that's why he's mad at you. And you have no sense of that he had a horrible day at work, and now he's struggling. But what if this guy had the knowledge and the courage to say to his wife at that time, I really had a bad day at work, and my inner critic is killing me. So it's not about you. It's not about anything you've done wrong. What I really want from you is your love and attention. Would this go differently? And so you can learn to do that, but you understand, again, the courage and the awareness it would take for you to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And especially for men, don't even go near vulnerability. It's not that macho and I don't want to, over stereotype the situation, but there's real truth to this, that they simply don't do vulnerability very well. No one does, but males in general definitely don't. So how do they deal with their vulnerability? They can withdraw, or they can go into attack mode. See, one way to deal with, and especially because now your energy is that it's my fault. Well, it doesn't take long before they sense that energy one way or another, and absolutely it's your fault, and I'm going to make sure you know about it. And you see, all of a sudden now, they are distracted from their pain and the critic of what happened to them all day long, because now they can just take it out on you. And this is the pattern in their life that they probably developed anyhow. You're the nurturer, they're the one that's self-centered. And again, the culture even says the male's the head of the household. Forgive me, but that's a very Catholic attitude here. So this is a tough thing, but you can learn. I wish I could say to you, and I will say to you, I guess I'm saying more, I wish that you could learn to do this, and this isn't easy either, but if you had the ability, at the time you found that you were feeling out of sorts, and let's just say either feeling a little too powerful or a little too needy or whatever else, is to honestly sit down at that time and be mindful. Just really check in and honor the part of yourself that is actually feeling that way. Rather than judge it, rather than be critical of it, part of a way I would attempt to define love is accepting yourself and others just the way you are. I mean, think about a best friend. Isn't that part of how a best friend relationship would work? Let's say you had a best friend who really differed with you on something or other. Would you smack her? Would you tell her, unless you change your mind, I'm not going to be your friend anymore? What I found in my research with cancer, which may surprise you, and why I believed that I found people lived longer with cancer, was when they felt listened to, cared for, and supported. And then when I was reviewing all of my notes and rereading some books for tonight's lecture, it just hit me. It's just like, well, of course. It just hit me in another way of course they would live longer. If you feel listened to, supported, and cared for, think about that in terms of then this inner critic process, or just feeling good about yourself, and then what would happen in terms of the way your physical body functions and your health. Does it surprise you that these people maybe then would become healthier, live longer? And so I know, again, Bruce got into this far earlier than I did in looking at Marshall Rosenberg's stuff and nonviolent communication. But if you could really check in with yourself when you are having a critic attack or a judge attack, and say to her, am I coming from my heart? Is this coming from my heart? Is this really about wanting to establish relationship and harmony? Or is it about, dealing with my disowned self or my inner critic or something else instead of, I love this person. Why in the world would I talk to this person this way? So if you could, again, depending on your circumstances that day when you were feeling angry or whatever it was, is just go sit down and be with it. Honor the part of you that is honestly mad. There's a part of you that's mad. And when it feels listened to and cared for and supported, just like your children. If you appreciate this more when you were the parent raising your children. But let's say, and I'm sure you've had this experience with your children, where they can be pretty needy or wanting or demanding about what they want. And hopefully you learned eventually that you didn't just give in to every demand and every request and whatever. And so you you learned how to talk to the children in a way that you listened to whatever it is that they wanted of you, but obviously you're not going to just do everything they think you should do. And in the end, what works is not that you do it or don't do it, but that they feel listened to, that they feel heard. And so that's what you want to learn to do for yourself and for your partner, is listen to yourself. Accept yourself rather than judge yourself or be critical, and the same of your partner. I'm asking a lot because when you're in the throes of feeling pretty crummy, this isn't that simple. But if you're going to break this pattern, it's you who has to break it. I say the good news is you can break the pattern. The bad news is you have to do it. Yes?
It seems like it seems like one of the key themes that runs through a lot of this sort of work is the idea of the observer, that sort of transpersonal consciousness that kicks in that says, oh yes, I am a being that is having this experience that maybe everyone has experienced this in different ways, but there's a sense that speaking from those few moments in my life when that feeling is kind of kicked in where you love yourself unconditionally for no particular reason, that feeling, it seems like, is what oftentimes provides the fuel to going beyond the stuck pattern and transcending the knee-jerk response and reaction kind of thing. So maybe you could talk about that.
Indeed, as you're able to parent yourself or reparent yourself, remember initially and essentially your inner critic is like this 911. You know, it's honestly trying to protect you, and it is alarmed. It's feeling threatened. And it's going to do what it believes you need to do. It needs to do to improve the situation for you. One of the ways to change this inner critic, this inner voice experience, is to let it know that you're able to now parent yourself in a healthier way. And if you can appreciate, it would love to take a vacation. It would love to really believe that you could take care of yourself. And so in two unique situations that come up for me right away, when you are in a really good place spiritually, feeling really connected, and when you're falling in love, the critic disappears. So, but they're more extreme situations. But if you can sit down, and again, depending on how much time we have tonight, or it's something we could do this weekend in the workshop, is to sit down and actually meet your critic and ask it, is there anything you can do to help it, or in just getting to know it? If you really approach it this way, I just want to get to know it. Why is it there? What does it want? That you can begin this fascinating dialogue where it can become your best ally. Instead of your critic, your ally, because it is sharp. It knows everything in terms of, your strengths and your weaknesses. But now it can actually work for you when it knows that it can trust you. And so it'd be like parenting, where what we want to do for our children is to get them to that point where they can take over and we can, go on vacation, we can let them go. So that's what we need to learn to do, is to instill a trust within that part of us that we can take over and then work with it, instead of it always seems to be pointing out everything we're doing wrong, and you would, everything you're doing is a mistake, and if you could only do it differently, you'd be, then just fill in the blank, but happier, healthier. The other part of this, and I remember when I was first learning about the inner child, I honestly, it was like a pop psychology kind of a thing, and I had difficulty, but I will tell you without reservation, firstly, we have so many aspects to ourselves, but that you do have this part of you that is this wounded, vulnerable inner child. And even if you think, because this is such a unique group, with this being RVML, you're probably aware of some of the shaman stuff where, like in soul retrieval, I really believe that we just use different names or terms for very similar concepts in terms of how we can heal. And so just like you might do soul retrieval and get in touch with a part of yourself that is feeling very split off and anything but safe or loved, you can go inside and dialogue with this inner child as a label, but a part of you that absolutely is scared to death to, try to be unique and be its spontaneous, innocent self. But if you can learn to do that, and you can, then you can reparent it and begin to make it feel safe again. And it's a common thing I do in therapy, is to, whatever the concern might be, is to ask that person, okay, let yourself remember some earlier event in your life that is now contributing to whatever it is you're concerned about. This doesn't just come out of nowhere, appear in a vacuum. Because I say your memory's perfect, your recall is faulty, but everything that has ever happened to you, you have somehow within your recall. And your critic's a good example for you to think about. What your critic really does remember every little detail.
Dean, just curious, do you use hypnotherapy in your work at all?
I do, but I tend to call it and think of it more in terms of guided imagery. Technically, there are probably differences between hypnosis and guided imagery, but in real practice, they're extremely similar. Hypnosis has the image of you have to go into, a trance and give up your awareness in order to accomplish, taking in the suggestion from another or from yourself in order to change whatever it is you're trying to change. In guided imagery, it's more, perhaps not as definite in the initial procedures or approaches how you get into this focused state of attention or altered state of consciousness. But I think it's just a matter of the approach of the therapist more than anything, how you get there. But then, absolutely, you want to go inside and if you understood, truly understood the power of your thought and your beliefs. Again, from a metaphysical position, you're God. If you even understood that, really understood that, there's nothing you can't do. Nothing. With faith, you can move mountains. And I'm not kidding. If you've read the books, I'm going to forget his name, the 5-book series, this wonderful fella, Baird Spalding. And I wouldn't be surprised, but that you have the books here in your library. What an eye-opener, where going back to either the end of last century or early this century, a number of scientifically oriented people went to the Far East and lived among adepts and masters and so forth. And I'm just as convinced as I can be that if you can access the God part of you, there's nothing you can't change. And you want to talk about your critic disappearing when you get to that point of realizing your power. But even from a scientific perspective, when you talk about the placebo effect, placebos work as well as major medication. In fact, the more serious the illness and the more extreme the treatments, the better the placebo effect works. So I'm telling you from a lot of experience as well as knowledge and training. So if you believe something, and with hypnosis, you could think of it as a way of tricking your mind or brain or body, but when you're in that state, and if otherwise, the way I would say to people when I work with them is, even if you don't really believe this, if this is too new, too good to be true, what do you mean I can use my beliefs or my imagination to change my health? Remember, I'm working with chronic pain, I'm working with cancer. So imagine if you didn't know me and you come into me and you have this sense of, you can imagine your pain away or you can imagine your disease away. This is very offensive on one level. But if you really understand this, you genuinely have that power and that ability. Approximately half the time, your beliefs are as powerful as any medical treatment or any other kind of treatment you will ever get. It's about your belief in it. And so if you really understood who you were and believed in that power, again, there's nothing you couldn't change. So again, going back to your question about do I hypnosis, I prefer to call it guided imagery because I think hypnosis scares some people, that they're going to relinquish their awareness to a stranger or be made to do some silly thing that we see with stage hypnotism or whatever. And I'm not wanting to be critical about stage hypnotism. I think if you get an opportunity to see a stage hypnotist, one, it can be very entertaining, but you'll get a sense of, oh my God, the power of your mind through suggestion, what you can do. It's incredible. So very definitely, like on the last page of your handout, essentially there are a bunch of affirmations. I call them nurturing rules that came from John Bradshaw's work, is that if you could, when you go inside, because if you stay at an outer logical level and say, okay, I'm going to be who I want to be and no one's going to turn me upside down again, it only goes so far. You're going to have to repeat the hell out of that thing before it's going to start to work. But when you go inside, and I can't completely explain to you, even in terms of brainwave frequencies and states of mind, but it's different. When you're in that focused state of attention and you tell yourself and believe that you can be a certain way, you can really begin to change that. But what I believe, and I know John Bradshaw believes very strongly, is that remember, it's the emotion, the charge, the experience, and the belief within you. So you've actually got to access that emotion again. Now, there are more efficient ways to do this, like Ruddy and I know in Psych K. If anything, and if you know anything about Psych K, we're learning more efficient ways to do this. But unless you get back to feeling what happened when you took on those beliefs and dealing with the feelings and releasing the feelings, not just the idea that you're now going to say in a logical, in your head way that you're going to be different. You can dramatically change a situation. So that when I ask in therapy for someone to go back and remember what some experience in your life that's contributing to your current concern, invariably they'll go back to a younger time, usually in your childhood, and then just talk with this child, just talk with this person. You'll see yourself at an earlier time, and one of the key things is to acknowledge how that young person is feeling and be totally empathetic. Remember, your whole idea is to listen, support, and care. And that's exactly what that child needs and wants. So you can find out honestly what that child needs and wants from you. And in allowing that child to feel safe again, like in soul retrieval or reparenting or regression, they're just different terms. Then when you feel safe again, and that part of you is allowed to really come out and be expressed, now you can have an intimate relationship, which is all about openness and honesty. But until that happens, you're not even getting it close to openness and honesty. You wouldn't dare risk it. Your critic would never permit it. Yes?
I'm interested in the concept of selfishness as it pertains to this subject. I'm interested in the concept of selfishness as it pertains to this. When you use the term narcissism or DSM-4, narcissistic personality disorder, or sociopathic personality disorder, there's sort of an implication in all of that you can't really trust human nature, that human nature, so-called, has to be like disciplined or guided in a certain way. Otherwise, we'll just revert to this sense of just being concerned about ourselves. And what I'd like you to address is, what is the wound that's underneath a narcissistic personality? What's the wound that's underneath a sociopathic personality? Is there something there that's not just some kind of a raw, 2-year-old saying me, 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 but is there something underneath it that might be, I have a feeling, instructive to all of us? Because I think there's a profound distrust, it seems to me, of basic human nature in a way. And the idea that we have to discipline, we have to drum out this selfishness out of people.
Okay, you said a lot, so let me try. This is going to sound simplistic, but it starts with loving yourself. If you love yourself, truly love yourself, accept yourself for who you are, you're not going to have a personality disorder. So it starts with that. So I would say, whether it's a narcissistic personality or a sociopath, I can guarantee you they do not love themselves. Even though you might say a narcissist, in fact, would love him or herself, they don't. They actually hate themselves, and it's a cover-up. So I can even tell in my own experience, when I'm feeling insecure or vulnerable because I don't know how to do something, I tend to raise my voice or get loud, or that's when I can start to judge, because it's a cover-up. I really don't know what I'm doing, but it's a sense of kind of a cover-up to disguise, any sense of vulnerability. With a sociopath, you can have someone who has learned to shut him or herself off from their feelings so greatly that they just truly don't feel. And so they don't understand consequences. So they're a sociopath. They just don't care because they're that shut off from their feelings. And then it's just, I really believe that all behavior is adaptive. It's just maladaptive. They've just gotten into this maladaptive pattern of how to deal with not loving themselves, or have become so detached from their feelings. Now, selfishness is a matter of how you define selfishness. I would choose people to be very selfish. But in the sense that, as my title of my book is Doctor's Orders Go Fishing, do what you love and do it up. What we have learned not to do is to take care of ourselves, to identify what our real needs are, and then do that. We get caught up in a pattern of, you're supposed to go to work and earn a living for your family, and men do manly things, whatever that means. And women, this role that I was already addressing before. And you forget about what really is your passion or makes your heart sing. And it's because of the culture saying that it is selfish, but in a different way of defining selfish, that you would think about yourself versus you're supposed to do for others. When I was in Sunday school, I remember learning joy, J-O-Y, Jesus, others, you. You came last. Now, I mean this sincerely. This is what I was taught. But I would say our culture in general does this. That it's a genuine misunderstanding of who you are, and that you must have this balance between doing what you think you need to do and what you really want to do. And this is where I think we slide ourselves badly. In fact, what comes to mind is when men retire, because your greatest sense of self-esteem is being the provider, is that it's a hugely stressful time, a huge adjustment, and that most men, I think, are probably going to experience a breakdown in their health related to it being so stressful, because your sense of who you were is gone. And you don't just slide into feeling good about yourself in another way that nearly balance is how you got to feel good about yourself here. And for women, when your children leave home, the empty nest syndrome, again, you're at high risk at that time, my opinion, because your greatest sense of meaning or being has changed dramatically too. Now, how do you get to feel good about yourself? And that's where your marriage can also now become at risk. Now, I'll joke in one sense, because let's say you're retired and now you're home, and now you're going to try to tell your wife how to run the house. So, one, that's going to create problems all by itself. But when children leave home, because what can happen very unfortunately is in relationship our focus goes to the children, and then we actually use the children too often to meet our needs, when, especially if the relationship is not going well, that that relationship can be in real trouble at that time if you have not found a way to really communicate and speak openly and honestly, relate openly and honestly with one another. Yes?
Yes, please.
I would like to ask you if you could address, especially for women, when and what you just said about meeting your own needs versus, I find myself, my kids are adults and I still have difficulties spending money or time on myself because I feel like I should invest in my kids. I should send them money or send them to workshops and not me. It's like, and I have the greatest difficulty making that break, and they're 29 and 25, the older ones, and then the 14, and it's really hard.
Right.
When do you stop? I'm
not sure. Well, firstly, it's up to you, and there's not a right time, but you have a lot of company. It's a truly normal pattern for parents to want to continue to be parents, even though indeed there are some who are glad when the kids are finally gone, and then they truly have time now to do other things besides having put your life on hold for 20 years per child. So when you say, when does the time come, or maybe even how should you deal with this, it's very personal, it's very subjective. But the way I would approach it in therapy would be to go inside and connect with a wise, loving part of yourself. And that's one thing we definitely will do this weekend in the workshop, is whether you call it your soul, it's a label, but there's a part of you that absolutely knows what you need to do to be healthy or to be anything. And it can't wait to tell you. In fact, it's been telling you in your dreams every night, but in our culture, we haven't learned to respect that and pay attention. So one thing, very practical thing, any one of you could do, starting right tonight, is ask your dreams, what do I need to do to be whatever? And pay attention. And even if you've never done this before, I will tell you in my experience, if you take this seriously, you will get that insight what you can do. You can learn to do this yourself. And that's my approach in this workshop, is to show you how to do it. You are your own best therapist, your own best anything. And think about it for those of you in your own way, however you understand accessing God or the God part of you, what does God not know? So I used to joke not a joke, but it was just a way to try to say it to people when I was working in all these medical settings, is I would never propose to you that you wouldn't consult, any medical person to determine what you need to do to heal. But on the other hand, why would you not also consult this? So again, I would never say don't do this, but why in the world wouldn't you do this? So you positively can access a part of yourself that knows. And then it'll be different for different people depending on where you are and what you need to do. And so we have to be very careful about judging ourselves or even judging others around what they're going through and what they need to do. So even in praying, I would give you this admonition to, at the end of your prayer, and you're usually praying for someone else, it's too selfish to pray for yourself, but to say, thy will be done. So that, be careful what you pray for, you might just get it, is that you have that caveat that I do or experience what I need to experience as part of this, being who you are and why you're here, instead of just trying to short circuit some stuff. Or, another thing I used to say to work with people is, you can pay me now or pay me later, is, if you don't deal with what you came to do this time, you get to do it again. You can think about that one, about why you want to do the work now. And I mean that. I really do believe this. It's my understanding. You do the work now or you get to do it again. So you don't get away from it. Yes?
We could get into a weekend conversation about this, but you were talking about how we are God being human, but then you talk about the God part of ourselves, and I don't see where there can be the separation. I mean, if I am God, then I am whatever it is that I'm doing. For example, if someone is learning, finds out they have a skill is a pianist, okay? They still have to sit down and practice and play the piano to fulfill that. So it seems to me that we're just in that ongoing process of being God as human and just getting better and better at it, hopefully, all the time. So if you could just clarify a little bit more about that,
Okay.
as if there's a separate God part of us that I have to access. I don't quite get that.
Well, understand in this separation that now your ego or your inner critic or this very wounded child is running your life. So you're not in touch with the God part of you. You're very focused on, and you're critical pretty much because it's feeling so threatened, or you are, make sure that you're going to stay in your head and not access this part of you that indeed is God, or as I say, the God part of you. So another way to say it, if this helps, is everything is God, okay? And so you are you, manifesting as you, but you're God. God is simply manifesting as you, just like it's manifesting as something else. And so one of the things I know from my study in looking at different religions and philosophical systems, that the one fundamental belief that goes through all religions and these philosophical systems, and as part of my sense of humor, that it's amazing how much they disagree, that they could actually find that they agree on this one major thing, and it is that we are one with God. Now that's a lot to wrap yourself around, so I don't want to propose in trying to, in a very short time, say to you in a way that you would resonate with, that you understand that, how you are one with that.
What I don't see is how.
What I don't see is how I can be this separate being who is being run by my inner critic versus God, because I am God.
It's like his sociopath. You can get so cut off that you forget. Your spiritual light is just simply diminished to the point that it's out.
Even if that's how I'm manifesting whatever as a human being, I'm still God.
You are
that.
indeed, but you will have forgotten.
Right.
Right.
But I still am God.
Yes, indeed you are. You can't. Well, you can't not be.
You can't not be.
You can't not be.
Even when my inner critic or whatever
But your critic doesn't know that.
seems to be running the show. But
it is running the show. I will tell you by far that your critic is running your life and you don't know it, and that you can learn to separate from it and regain this sense of who you truly are.
But then it sounds to me like there's a me, and then there's God, and there's my inner critic,
there's
and I'm
you
choosing.
And lots of aspects, lots of, whether we call them sub-personalities or primary selves or disowned selves. I know when I'm doing intuitive work, like my wife is extremely intuitive, and when we do inner work and I'm talking with the wisdom that comes through her, because I tend to be academic, I have lots of questions and I'm very curious. And I remember the last time, because sometimes I get admonished for, you're too in your head, don't try to label everything. But I remember having encouraged to ask one time recently about, who are you? What is it that I'm actually speaking with? And it simply said a subdivision or an aspect of Shelley. So, everybody's going to understand this differently, and it's largely about your personal experiencing it and knowing when you're accessing that part. Sometimes I like to call intuition the wisdom channel that simply exists. If you think about in this room right now, every radio station, every television station have their frequencies in this room, but you don't have a tune or an amplifier to appreciate that they're here. Thank God you don't. You go crazy. There'd just be too much sense overload. But if you can appreciate this metaphor or analogy that the wisdom channel simply is, you just have to learn to tune it in. And for different reasons, we have not been able to tune that in. We're tuned into channel crazy that, that disallows our being in that state of harmony or peace that we need to be in to access the wisdom channel.
I'm God tuned into channel crazy.
Good.
Okay. I just don't feel comfortable with that concept that there's me and there's God and that I somehow have to find my way to, tune into, because that to me, I feel like a separation that I don't feel exists.
Okay. Well, remember, everything is God. You can't not be God or part of it. But in terms of the way your life is being run by your critic as such, you indeed can feel a real separation. That's what the ego is all about. It's an adapted self versus your soul is who you really are. But your adapted self can take over to the extreme that you've lost any sense of your true identity.
Okay. That's enough for tonight. Thank you.
Okay. I think we are out of time, but I'm willing to stick around and talk further or answer your questions. I really appreciate this opportunity, so thank you for coming out.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.